The Truth and the Circle Around It by Kage Scott, Chapter 6, page 94. A Killer in the Rain. 0203 August 28th, 1988, Surrey, British Columbia, Canada. Carl Forbes was finished his walk around patrol of the Cloverdale exhibition grounds. All was normal for the semi-retired security guard who had traded some graveyard shifts with Greg, one of his co-workers who was using his holidays to take his young family to Disneyland. His body still hadn't become used to the shift change, and he yawned almost every 2 or 3 minutes, even with the fresh air to keep him alert. Making the late night shift even more unpleasant was the fact that Carl could be described as a very small man. He is barely average height and is a very thin man, so even with the rain gear and sweater vest, he is shivering from the damp and the cold. It was quiet except for the large drops of rain coming down randomly, bouncing and plopping as they landed in the puddles and on the gravel. The only noise he could make out was the distant traffic, the occasional whinny of one of the horses in the stables, and the crunching of the gravel moving each time his feet touched down in the steps of his fast walk as he made his way across the parking lot. He could see his partner Felix standing in the wash of interior light in the control tower, which was just visible from this angle over top the highest point of the grandstands, but disappeared behind the tall roof of the structure as Carl made his way across the lot. Then he realized he needed to check in and went back to the gate he had just walked away from. Felix was just an object at this distance, but it was comforting to know he was there and that at 0245 he would be the one in the rain gear walking around in the weather. Carl had retired from the park ranger service with a 30-year pension courtesy of the province. He had spent almost 14 years at a posting up north in the Wells Gray Provincial Park, before moving to the lower mainland to be the overall supervisor at Pinecone Burke Provincial Park, just north of Coquitlam. For the last 3 years of his service, he took the job at the exhibition as a time passer and for the extra money. But he had only been there for a bit more than a year, which made him one of the new guys. When all was said and done, he didn't mind. It was a change and there was hardly any pressure. He aimed his maglite flashlight up towards the tower and blinked it 3 times, then pushed the call button on his portable radio. "Can you see my light, Felix?" "Ah, yeah, Carl, no problem. You're on your way back from the far gate, I guess, eh?" "That's right. There's a half dozen or so cars still in the lot. I'm going to take a quick look at them before I come back up." "Sure, Carl. Probably just left there by folks who took cabs home." "Right. Oh, that's my guess, too." "Yeah, everyone was gone early from the bar tonight." Then Felix remembered a detail he hadn't passed on yet. "Oh, hey, Carl, I just remembered that Katrina Lewis, hasn't called in yet, and the alarm in the grandstand is inactive still. She's likely still tidying up." "Well, okay there, Felix. How's this? You give her a call while I check these cars, and if she doesn't answer, let me know and I'll drop by on my way up." "Sure, friend. I'll dial the main number for the bar and let you know." Both men were happy with the arrangement, and Carl picked up his step as the rain began to come down in a steady downpour. He shined his bright flashlight into the interiors of the vehicles as he made complete circles around each of them. They were scattered about the lot, but were all within 100 or so meters of each other in the corner of the lot closest to the entrance to the bar underneath the grandstands. He was just about to check the last vehicle when he noticed some movement in the shadows behind the large steel garbage bins outside the entrance to the kitchen. Carl, listen up. The sound of Felix's voice crackling over the speaker of the portable radio startled him as his attention was fixed on the movement. I just talked to Katrina. She'll be done in a few minutes. Are you still on the phone with her? No, I'm not, Carl. But I just hung up a few seconds before I called you. Okay then. Okay then. Stay alert. I seen some movement outside the kitchen in between the garbage dumpster. I thought it was maybe her, but now I don't think so. Then he aimed his light beam towards the area as he walked towards it. He was about 20 yards away from the dumpster when a raccoon came into his light and stood on its back legs as its eyes reflected the powerful light in two white dots. Carl, you okay down there? I think so, buddy. I'm blinding a big old raccoon, but I'll take a closer look to make sure. Felix chuckled to himself and then answered back, Does he look dangerous from there? Ah, yeah. It looks like he's wearing a mask, and he's being awfully sneaky about the whole thing, too. Both men laughed out loud, away from the radio as Carl's flashlight beam moved away and quickly down to his feet before he pushed the button to switch it off. The raccoon ran away towards the darkness. Further down the building, Carl was about to turn back to check the last car when he heard crunching in the gravel behind him. A large hand cupped over his mouth and pulled back on his head. Boom! A large knife blade sunk deep into his back, moving through to his left lung and touched against his heart. Then the large gloved hand pushed him backwards and down to the ground on his back. The glove pressed on his face, forcing the back of his head hard into the loose gravel. Then, as if all in one motion with the fall to the ground, the killer's legs straddled Carl's body while at the same time the tall man's knees pushed on Carl's elbows, leaving the dying man nowhere to go and no way to get there. Before he could begin to fight back by kicking or trying to rotate or squirm in any defensive way, the large, sharp blade of the killer's knife penetrated into the left temple, causing instantaneous death. Make sure you check him out real close, Felix chuckled as he spoke. He might be trying to take off with something. The killer looked down at the radio still clutched in Carl's left hand. Then he pulled out the knife from the temple and moved it about, carving his calling card into Carl's forehead. Did you hear me, Carl? Felix became a little serious. The killer pulled a plastic bag out of his jacket pocket and dropped it on Carl's chest as he stood up. Carl! The radio crackled with the shout. The killer ran away along the fence between the parking lot and a grassy ditch. Carl! Felix was suddenly very serious, very curious, and very worried. The killer had made it across the lot and through the fence. He was on the other side of 60th Street and into his waiting car. Hello, Felix. Katrina answered the special ring that alerted employees that it was an internal call. Katrina, is Carl in there with you? Felix's voice was excited and shaky. No, Felix. Katrina could tell something was wrong. Is the door locked? Yes, it's always locked. Don't let anyone in unless you know for sure it's me or Carl. What's happening, Felix? Now Katrina was shaky too. Just stay there. I'm calling the police. Felix was almost too nervous to think clearly until his training took over. Stay on the line with me. I'll use the other phone. Then Felix put Katrina on the speakerphone and picked up the other phone and dialed 911. 0228, August 28th, 1988. The security company had sent a car to open the locked gate at the RCMP, and the RCMP had sent a cruiser. Then, within seconds of their arrival, Felix hit a series of switches on the main panel, and every light around the entire complex came on. Less than 30 seconds after that, one RCMP officer was checking Carl for a pulse, while her partner was calling in for backup. Within 3 minutes, four other cruisers were on the property, and a canine unit was en route. By then, the killer had made his getaway without hardly being noticed. 0258, August 28th, 1988. Now there are 7 pairs of officers and 2 canine teams looking in, around, and behind every nook and cranny at Cloverdale Exhibition Grounds. The detectives from the Serious Crimes Division have arrived. An investigator from the coroner's office is pulling into the parking lot, and 2 ambulance crews are standing by, while the first crew on the scene is treating Felix for mild shock. All around is the ominous clatter of the horses and other livestock, letting the world around them know that the night has been interrupted and unsettled. Have we searched the entire grounds yet, Corporal? Detective Sergeant Paul Wallofson asks Corporal Diane Nixon as he gets out of his unmarked car. I'm not sure, Sergeant, but we must be very close, she answers politely. Is Dave Adams in charge? Paul asks as he looks around. No, he's on leave. Sergeant Travis is. He's over by the body of the slain guard. She points to an area circled by cruisers and ambulances, with their front ends pointed into a section of the parking lot. Okay, Corporal, thanks. Paul looks around at the puddles in the parking lot and then up at the sky. How long have you been here? My partner and I were first on the scene at 23 minutes after 2. About 45 minutes or so then. 35 minutes or so then. He comments as he looks at his watch. Is this your first homicide? No, but it's the worst. She looked at him with a shallow stare, then she shook all over, like people do when they get that cold shiver. It's very graphic. They all are, I guess, but I'll take your word for it. Then he looked up as the 2 investigators from the coroner's office walked up. Hello, folks, the older of the 2 men said to Paul and Diane as he stepped up to them. Hello, Jake. Hello, Lance. Paul greeted them. Hi, was all Diane could let out. Are the lab boys at the crime scene? Jake asked. Yes, it's Nancy Underwood and Harvey Belowski, Diane said. Oh, okay, good, Jake replied favorably. Corporal, has it rained since you've been here? Paul asked her. A little, but we took photos right away and covered the area around the man's body before any more drops came down on him. Well, okay, good work. Let's go see what we have, Paul mentioned for them to follow. Diane, I'll need you with us. Jake looked at her with a friendly face. Within the next hour, the grounds would be double-checked. The president of the exhibition would be at the scene, and everyone would know they had a serial killer on the loose. The note left behind by the killer was short but informative. It read, I took advantage of another opportunity. The word opportunity was all capitals, and the hint was taken immediately by the detectives who were familiar with the case of the dead FBI agent in Washington State and another victim found a month before in downtown Vancouver. 1133, August 28, 1988. Later that morning, Detective Sergeant Paul Wallofson would have a meeting with detectives and investigators from the city of Vancouver, the city of Spokane, Washington, and the FBI, while at a house on Pitt River Road in Coquitlam. Another cruiser has pulled up. Two officers have walked up the path and are looking at Carl's wife, Mary, across the kitchen table, about to give the worst news she'll ever receive. Chapter 7. Life Goes On. 0955, October 11, 1988, Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. RCMP Kage Division in Edmonton, Alberta, is the regional headquarters for the province of Alberta. Therefore, you can imagine it's a busy place. Officers from all over go there periodically for training, re-qualifications, or to carry out tasks and investigations. Joe has been here about 3 times before. The Seattle Bureau works with the RCMP all the time. You would think they have more dealings with F Division in Regina, or E Division in Vancouver, but surprisingly the Edmonton office gets the majority of visits from the Seattle field office. Scott McMaster had moved over to the RCMP from military intelligence 2 years ago, so to be offered such a big assignment the day after being posted to K Division was not really a surprise. It shouldn't ruffle anyone's feathers given his experience, but some people still looked at him as a new guy. The assignment would involve working undercover up in Grand Prairie to get inside a company that was employing a bunch of mafia boys. It was a front to hide people that were in trouble in other countries that would be brought to one of those cities in Canada or the States and get a work permit under an assumed name. They could usually hide as long as they wanted to because when the permits expired, all that had to be done was send them to a new place under a new name. The catch was that in order to keep these companies from being looked into, they had to do actual legitimate jobs and employ enough locals that no one would get suspicious. The chances of him being recognized are really slim. All the employees have been checked. Not only that, but he's got a pretty good disguise going on. And for the past 11 years, he's been fairly hidden away from the day he switched to the police. He's known undercover is where he was headed. He doesn't get out much, and most definitely not into the world most of these people live in. Yes, the operation already underway by the FBI has been relayed to the RCMP, and now the two agencies are planning together. Interpol has opted to decline an invitation to take part in the venture. They already have a task force that has been trying to catch up to the Alvarez and Friends, which is concentrating its efforts in eastern Canada. Instead, everyone will share information unless something overlaps. The month of training and studying has passed, and it's time to get the operation underway. Joe Myers, Bruce Bales, a.k.a. Tom Kendall, Bob Riley, Scott McMaster, a.k.a. Derek Miles, and Kevin Shears will all be in the building at the same time. They will all be in meetings, although not the same ones at the same times. They will have to work together, but they won't all know exactly what is going on. There is a leak somewhere, but they don't know where. For this reason, they are the only ones who know about this operation other than Nguyen and Clark. A pretty receptionist puts down her phone and looks over the well-dressed man in the waiting area. "Excuse me, Special Agent Myers. Inspector Nguyen is off the phone now. Go right in." "Thank you, miss." Joe puts down the weekly news magazine and picks up his briefcase, then gets up and walks in the open door. "Special Agent Joe Myers. I'm Inspector Hong Nguyen." The inspector says as the two men shake hands. "Have a seat over at the coffee table. I prefer to work over there, if you don't mind." "Not at all, sir." Joe quickly looks over at the spacious, well-decorated, yet simple office. "This is a nice office you have, sir." Oh, hey, call me Hong. I don't worry too much about rank. We're all here to do the job, and I don't expect my guys to get too official either, Hong remarked. Two of the members from Grand Prairie will be here in a half an hour. I briefed them earlier this morning and sent them to get the cars and equipment you'll need. Joe is anxious to find out how high-tech this operation is going to be. What kind of equipment are you talking about, Hong? Hong, well, since my regular appointment is OIC of our Special Operations Division, I get to take advantage of all the latest equipment due to the severity of what Alvarez has been up to. I've basically been given a blank check. Hong holds up the coffee pot and gestures the offer of a fresh cup. Thanks, Hong. I'll take some cookies, too. Joe, I'm trying something new. I have a habit of doing that. In fact, the young fellow named Shears you'll be working with is just a kid. He's only 20 or 21, and he's not even a full member. You've heard of our auxiliary program? Oh, yes, I've worked with Shears before. Hong pauses for a quick second, as he is surprised by the comment. Good, well, then you know a few things about him. Tough, not just for his size either. I wouldn't fight him if I had a gun. And I carry a gun. The two men have a laugh together. Then Joe says with concern, but he's pretty naive. Are you guys sure about his participation? His file does show a need for maturity, but his status allows us to give him some latitude and freedom that the rest of us tend to avoid. Hong takes a sip of coffee and a bite of cookie, pausing to allow Joe to speak. But Joe is interrupted by a knock on the frame of the open door. Talking about me, eh? Kevin says while he knocks on the door jamb. Hey, you little brat, how the hell are you? Joe laughs as he gets up to shake Kevin's hand. Well then, I take it you two have worked together before? Hong asks. Worked with me too, sir, Bob said as he punched Joe hard in the shoulder and then jumped behind Kevin, laughing and pretending to taunt Joe to fight. Go ahead, you big bruiser. I've got a bodyguard. You two are a little early, Hong said as he motioned for them to have a seat. That's because we're good, Hong. Bob chuckled. That's because we're good, Hong. Bob chuckled. Did you get everything on the list? Hong asked. Got it all, Hong. I'll run everyone through it after lunch, Bob said as he handed a fully filled out checklist to the inspector. Good. Brenda, the receptionist, knocks on the door. Mr. Nguyen, your operative is here. He's downstairs in briefing room 2. Thank you, Brenda. Gentlemen, I'm going to be asking a lot of you, of all of you. Probably more of you, Joe, Kevin. I know you've had to handle a lot since you've been an auxiliary member. I'll understand if you decide not to participate in this operation. Why is that, sir? Kevin asks as he looks around the room at the others. I think I may know what he's getting at, Kidditch, Bob says to Kevin. May I, Hong? Go ahead, Bob. Bob took a big breath in and let it out slowly. Kevin, we may have to deal with situations you haven't fully been trained for. We might have to ask you to do some things that are outside the boundaries police officers normally don't cross. Kevin's expression took on the kill look mixed with almost pale fear. He took a deep breath and twisted his neck around so it would crack a few times. Well, isn't that just great? He said with disgust. Can I look forward to being jumped by 4 guys outside a bar again, or having people try to cut me up everywhere I go? You see, the Visconti family is one up. The controlling mafia type organization in Canada. They are getting bigger and more powerful all the time. When Kevin and Joe worked together before, they were dealing with people who worked with the Visconti's people, like Antonio Alvarez. There were some incidents. Kevin, I seem to remember you have the talent to take care of these problems, Hong asked with authority, as if he expected only one answer. He wasn't about to get the yes he wanted. Permission to speak freely, Inspector, Kevin said as he sat up straight in his seat. Go ahead, Hong replied. Am I here to be a bodyguard for someone again, or do real police work? Both. Kevin lets out a groan. When am I going to become a full member? That doesn't have anything to do with this, and you know it. Hong is now a little pissed off. I've sent a letter of recommendation along from your staff sergeant in Fort St. John, and if you do well on this assignment, you'll get one from me. So now, are you going to do this or not? I'll tell you when I know more details, Kevin said as he crossed his arms, put his right ankle up on his left knee, and leaned back into the leather couch. I suppose you would like another tryout with the national team. Would that make a difference without being a full member, sir? What does that mean? Joe asked, looking back and forth between the two arguing men. It means there are several high-ranking members who believe I shouldn't be allowed to take part in anything until I've been through depot training in Regina. I agree. Kevin is trying not to growl or grind his teeth while he's explaining this all to Joe, but McEwen is starting to steam, and Kevin is not going to back down. The national team refers to the guys who work on the security task force. It's part of the Protective Services Division. The guys that protect important people, escort dignitaries, do special surveillance, take care of security and intelligence for high-profile events, those kinds of things. Like our Secret Service, Joe replied, as both a comment and a question. Sort of, McEwen answered. Yeah, well, anyway, about 6 months ago, I tried out for the STF, Kevin was explaining. I went to one of our military bases in Chilliwack, British Columbia, and began the qualifying, but I was pulled off after it was discovered I didn't have the qualifications or really the right to even be there. So it burned some bridges? Joe asked as he realized where the conversation was going. Yeah, but I didn't burn them. They were burnt for me, Kevin remarked as he looked at McEwen. Who did? McEwen asked, sarcastically, as he stared back at his young subordinate. I did, Bob said. I pulled in a couple favors to get Kevin there, thinking that it would get him into depot. Well, it won't, McEwen said. No. And your promises won't either, sir. Kevin stood up and walked towards the door. Kevin, get back here and sit down, Bob ordered. Yeah? Kevin stopped at the door, not turning to face anyone. I knew I didn't have a choice. I never fucking do with you and your happy little jobs I do for you. That is enough, Constable, McEwen ordered the young man. Kevin turned quickly. Fuck you. I'm not a constable. My rank is corporal. And if you want me to give a fuck how much embroidery you walk around with, you'll drop the crap and treat me like one. And another thing, auxiliary or not, I'll get paid from now on, sir. Kevin had the bad habit that most young people do. He thought he knew more than he did. It seemed to him that he always had to prove himself before he could go ahead with the simplest of tasks. Not only that, but Kevin had been through a hell of a lot, more than most 21-year-olds. Even people that age, who were regular members of the force, which is what Kevin had aspired to be all his life. So he figured he had earned a few things. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. So pissing off McEwen was a bad thing. He had the power to stop Kevin's career right in its tracks. He didn't, but he could have. Joe and Bob managed to settle Kevin and the inspector down. Once everything took a break, the meeting resumed without any further problems. Kevin was actually the only one, other than McEwen, that met everyone involved with the operation and would be involved and would be the only one who would be in contact with everyone. He had a very important job that involved only a little more than doing his day job at the delivery service, which he had managed to get back. Things were supposed to be easy, unless, of course, the shit hit the fan. Then he would have more to do than anyone and be put in one of the most dangerous positions. Hong wanted to wrap up this meeting. Bob, there are a couple people downstairs I want you to talk to, Joe and Kevin. You two can sit in the listening room. They're both young offenders. Bob looked at Hong with a slight smile. Are they the ones from the Royal Bank heist last month? Yes, we had them brought in from the center for a couple days so we could do the polygraph and mental fitness evaluations. I would like you to spend a few minutes with them together. Okay, but why together? Bob asked. This was very unusual. Because they have been asking to talk to you, Hong replied, as if he was waiting for a reaction. The room became very silent, and Bob and Hong looked into each other's eyes for a few moments. Let's go then, boys, Bob said, as he started to gather up his files. I think I know what they want. Chapter 8 up next. Turn up the heat, the truth, and the circle around it by kage Scott.